Willa Vaughn didn't expect her Tuesday afternoon to end with a stranger defending her in the middle of a shouting match at a downtown cafe, especially not a stranger in a navy suit that probably cost more than her rent. "I'm sorry, what did you just say to her?" The voice was low, calm, but it cut through the noise like a razor. Willa froze. Her hand still gripped the coffee cup she'd been trying to salvage after Brett, her ex-manager, had knocked it off the table during his tantrum. He'd been yelling at her for quitting without notice, though she'd given 2 weeks and had the emails to prove it. Brett turned toward the man who had stepped between them, eyes narrowing. "This is none of your business." The man didn't flinch. He stood tall with a quiet kind of power, his gaze steady. "You raised your voice at her. You grabbed her wrist. That makes it everyone's business." Willa blinked. She didn't know him. She hadn't even seen him come in. Brett scoffed, clearly trying to puff himself up. "Who the hell are you?" The man pulled out his phone, still calm. "The guy calling the cops if you don't back the hell off." Brett's face went pale, lips tightening. After a beat, he stormed off, muttering under his breath. Willa let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hand trembled. Her fingers were damp with spilled coffee and her heart was racing like she'd run a marathon. The man turned to her. "Are you okay?" She nodded, though her voice caught in her throat. "Yeah. I think so." He looked at her for a second longer, then gently handed her a napkin from the counter. "He shouldn't have spoken to you like that." "Thanks for stepping in," she said, trying to collect herself. "I didn't catch your name." He hesitated, then gave a small smile. "Kellan Thorne." Willa blinked. "Wait, like Thorne?" "As in Thorne Developments," he gave a modest shrug. "Yeah, that one." Oh God, the guy who just defended her like some knight in a 3-piece suit was a millionaire real estate mogul. She suddenly became hyper-aware of her worn-out flats and the small coffee stain on her blouse. "I'm Willa," she said quickly. "Willa Vaughn, I didn't mean to drag you into that mess." "You didn't. I chose to step in." He glanced at the door where Brett had disappeared. "That guy's a walking lawsuit," she laughed, despite herself. "He's my ex-boss, or was. I just quit this morning." Kellan nodded like that made sense. "Good call." Willa expected him to walk away then. Men like him didn't linger. But instead, he looked at her for another moment, then asked, "Do you want to grab a coffee? One that's not all over the floor?" She blinked, surprised. "Seriously," he motioned to the counter. "I think you could use something warm." "And I could use a break." Willa followed him to the register, still trying to figure out what the hell just happened. They sat at a booth near the window. He ordered an Americano, black. She got a chai latte. She tried not to fidget. "So, what do you do, Willa?" She gave a half smile. "I used to be a marketing assistant for a startup that couldn't afford to pay their employees on time. Now, I guess I'm unemployed." Kellan's brow lifted. "You quit without another job lined up." "I couldn't take the disrespect anymore," she said honestly. "I'd rather be broke and sane than paid and miserable." He nodded slowly like he understood. "That's brave." She gave a short laugh. "I guess that's one word for it." They talked for nearly an hour. She found herself laughing more than she had in weeks. Kellan wasn't what she expected. He was confident, sure, but not arrogant. He listened, asked questions, and actually seemed to care about the answers. When they stood to leave, he looked at her for a moment, then said, "Would you let me take you to dinner sometime?" Willa stared. "Are you asking me out?" He tilted his head. "I'm asking if I can see you again, yes." She hesitated. "You don't even know me." "I know you stood your ground against someone who tried to intimidate you, and I know I haven't enjoyed a conversation like this in a long time." Her heart thudded. "All right. Dinner sounds nice." He smiled and pulled out a sleek black business card. "Friday night, I'll pick you up." Willa stared at the card after he left, heart still pounding hard against her ribs. What just happened? Friday evening came faster than she expected. When a sleek black town car pulled up in front of her building, her breath caught. The driver opened the door, and there he was, Kellan, in a charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, and no tie. His hair was perfectly tousled without looking like he tried too hard. "You look incredible," he said, taking her hand. Willa, in a soft navy wrap dress and borrowed heels, felt like she'd stepped into a different world. He took her to a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city skyline. A string quartet played softly. The menu didn't have prices. Willa sat across from him, trying not to gawk at the view or him. "So, this is normal for you?" Kellan laughed. "I don't usually bring strangers I meet in coffee shops to rooftop dinners, if that's what you're asking. And yet here we are," he leaned in. "I wanted to see you again." "I meant what I said." She looked at him, the city lights reflected in his eyes. "You barely know me." "Then tell me something that matters." Willa hesitated, then said quietly, "I've never felt seen the way I did when you stood up for me." Kellan's expression softened. "You deserve to be respected, Willa." Her heart fluttered. She wasn't used to men noticing her, really noticing her. Not just her looks or her resume, but her. They talked for hours, long after the plates were cleared. When he walked her to the car, he didn't try to kiss her. Instead, he looked at her like he was memorizing her face. "I'd like to see you again." She nodded, trying to hide the smile tugging at her lips. "I'd like that too." And just like that, something shifted. Neither of them realized it yet, but that moment outside the cafe wasn't just a one-time act of kindness. It was the start of something neither of them saw coming. Willa stepped out of the elevator, heels tapping quietly against marble as she entered the gallery. The invitation had arrived that morning, an envelope slipped under her door in heavy cream cardstock, embossed with a name she hadn't expected. Kellan Thorne. She hadn't seen him in 2 weeks. Not since their night on the rooftop, where the city had glittered below them like a dream too fragile to name. "Miss Vaughn," a woman in a sleek black dress asked. "Mr. Thorne asked that you be brought to him directly." Willa followed, her pulse thrumming. She debated whether or not to come, unsure what to make of the sudden silence. Tonight's event was a private viewing benefiting an arts foundation, nothing she'd normally be invited to, much less attend. But she hadn't been able to ignore the handwritten note tucked inside the envelope. "I hope you'll come. I'd like the chance to explain." The woman led her past polished sculptures and large abstract paintings until they reached a quiet alcove. Kellan stood near a tall window, drink in hand, the city lights behind him casting his silhouette in silver-blue glow. He turned as she approached. "You came." "I almost didn't," she answered, chin tilted. 2 weeks of nothing. That's a long time for someone who said he wanted to see me again." "I deserved that," he said, setting the glass down. "Can I explain? You can try." He stepped closer, but not too close. "My father had a stroke. It was sudden. I flew to Geneva the next morning and haven't really come up for air since." Willa's expression softened. "I'm sorry, is he all right?" "He's stable now, but the business is complicated. We weren't on good terms. I didn't want to drag you into it." "I'm standing here, aren't I?" she said. His mouth twitched, but there was no amusement in his eyes. "You have every right to be angry." "I'm not angry," she said. "I'm cautious." He nodded once. "That's fair." They stood in the quiet hush of the gallery, the faint notes of a piano drifting from another room. She studied him. The man who had radiated quiet command at the cafe now looked like he hadn't slept properly in days. "I don't expect you to wait around," he said, "but I didn't want to disappear without saying why." Willa folded her arms gently. "You didn't disappear. You sent a driver, a dress code, and a handwritten invitation. That's not nothing. I wanted to do this right." "Then let's start there," she said, tilting her head toward the nearest painting. "Tell me how a guy who owns half the skyline develops a taste for surrealist art." He laughed, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "My mother was a painter. I used to sit in her studio after school and pretend I understood what she was doing." "You pretended well," she said, glancing at the painting. "This one's titled Fragments of a Beginning." "Ironic," he said, "considering that's what I hoped tonight might be." Willa looked up at him. "Then don't vanish again." "I won't," he said. "I promise." Later, after the viewing, Kellan reached for her coat as they exited into the street. A Rolls-Royce idled at the curb. He opened the door for her, but she paused. "Is this our ride?" "No," he said. "It's yours." She blinked. "What?" He handed her a small velvet envelope. There's a meeting tomorrow morning with someone I think you should know. Her name's Marietta Leung. She runs a creative agency that's hiring. I took the liberty of sending her your portfolio. Her breath caught. You. How did you even get that? You left your resume on the table during our first coffee, he said. I remembered the name of your blog, found your work. It's good, Willa, really good. She stared at him. You set up a job interview? I didn't want to overstep. He shifted slightly. But I did want to help. I don't need charity. This isn't charity, he said. It's recognition. You're smart and talented and you deserve more than what that startup gave you. She looked down at the envelope, then back at him. This is a lot. I'll back off if you want me to, he said. But I meant what I said that night. I haven't enjoyed talking to anyone like that in a long time. She stepped closer. Then don't back off. His eyes flicked over her face, searching. Are you sure? I'm not afraid of complicated, she said, but I am afraid of silence. He nodded once. Then no more silence. She slid into the car, heart hammering. As the driver pulled away, she glanced back. Kellan still stood there, hands in his pockets, watching her go like he wasn't ready to let her out of his sight. The next morning, the agency's lobby was flooded with natural light, all glass and steel. Willa clutched her portfolio, nerves buzzing. She didn't know what would come of it, but she knew one thing for sure. Kellan Thorne didn't just stand up for her once. He was still standing behind her, even when it wasn't convenient. That terrified her more than she wanted to admit, because it meant she was starting to believe him. The first thing Willa noticed when she stepped into the penthouse was the silence, thick, expensive silence, broken only by the faint ticking of a vintage wall clock. She wasn't used to places like this. The elevator had opened directly into the living room, no hallway, no doorman asking questions. Just space and glass and skyline. Kellan turned from the floor to ceiling window, his sleeves rolled to the elbows, barefoot on polished wood. I didn't think you'd come. I wasn't planning to, she said, setting her purse on the edge of a marble console. Then I realized I didn't actually want to go home. He nodded once, then walked toward the open kitchen. Drink? Only if you're pouring one for yourself. He reached for a bottle of red and poured 2 glasses without asking, no label, no flourish. Just quiet familiarity, like he wasn't trying to impress her. She liked that more than she wanted to admit. I met with Marietta again, she said, taking the glass. They offered me the position. That was fast. I gave them a presentation, she said. Didn't want to wait around to be chosen. Kellan raised his glass slightly. You never did seem the type to wait for permission. She eyed him. You didn't ask me here to talk about my job. No, he admitted. I asked you here because I haven't been able to stop thinking about that night at the gallery. And I didn't want to keep doing this thing where I pretend I'm too busy for my own thoughts. Willa moved toward the edge of the room, where a black grand piano sat like a sculpture. This place doesn't look like someone who pretends much at all. He leaned against the counter, quiet for a moment. When my mother died, I bought this place the same week. I didn't need it. I didn't even like it. But it was the first property I ever closed under my own name, not my father's. She turned back to face him. So it was a statement. It was survival, he said. Some people mourn with flowers. I bought square footage. Willa took a long sip of wine. You're still not sleeping. He gave a small shrug. Too much noise in my head. Try letting someone in, she said. It's easier when there's another voice in the room. He studied her then, like he was trying to decide if she meant more than the words. She didn't flinch. Do you want to stay? He asked. Do you want me to? Yes. Then ask like you mean it. He crossed the room in 3 strides. Willa, stay. She set her wine down. All right. Later, after the quiet had settled between them again, she sat curled on the corner of the low leather sofa, her legs tucked beneath her. Kellan stood at the far window, one hand in his pocket, the other tracing the edge of the glass. I've never had someone challenge me the way you do, he said. You're not used to hearing no, she replied. I'm not used to hearing honesty. That's sad. It's reality. Willa studied him, watching the way his shoulders tensed again. You can tell me what's really going on with your father. You don't have to keep it polished. He wants me to take over, officially, her eyebrows lifted. Isn't that what you've been doing already? Not like this, Kellan said. It comes with conditions, marriage, children. A wife who looks good in photos and keeps her opinions to herself. Willa blinked slowly. Let me guess, he already has someone in mind. Her name is Vivienne. Her father owns half the land in the Hudson Valley. We had dinner once. She asked if I liked horses. Do you? I'm allergic, Willa laughed, but it faded quickly. So he's still trying to script your whole life. I've played along long enough, Kellan said, but I'm done pretending I don't want something else. She stood, walking toward him. And what is it you want? He turned to her, eyes level. You, the air between them stilled. I don't care what he demands, Kellan added. I'm not letting someone else write the ending. You think this is the ending? I think it could be the start. She reached up, fingers brushing lightly against his jaw, then stopped waiting for permission too. His mouth found hers without hesitation, no buildup, no caution. Just heat and certainty. She felt the tension he'd carried melt into her bones, like he'd been holding too much inside for too long. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Willa whispered, "What happens when he finds out?" Kellan didn't blink. Let him. She nodded once, then said softly, "If you're going to start a war, you better make sure I have a sword." You already do, he said. You've had it since the second I saw you stand your ground. Willa leaned her forehead against his, heart steady. Then let's see how far we can go. Kellan didn't answer. He didn't have to. Willa stood in the sun-drenched atrium of the Thorne estate, the scent of fresh cut gardenia drifting in from the open terrace. She'd been invited, or rather, summoned for brunch with Kellan's father. The invitation had arrived via a call from an assistant, followed by a curt confirmation email that felt more like a court summons than a family gathering. She adjusted the collar of her blouse, not because it was out of place, but because her nerves had settled like weights on her shoulders. Kellan hadn't joined her yet. He'd been called upstairs by one of the estate's legal advisors the moment they arrived, leaving her to navigate the cavernous manor alone. Voices echoed beyond the arched doorway. One of them was deeper than Kellan's, colder. The other belonged to a woman who introduced herself earlier as Vivienne, tall, elegant, and already speaking as if the estate belonged to her. When Kellan finally appeared, his jaw was tight, his cuff unbuttoned, and his patience clearly frayed. He's in the conservatory, Kellan said to Willa. He insisted you join us. She gave him a long look. And you, I'll be there, but be careful. He doesn't ask questions unless he already knows the answers. Willa followed him, her heels quiet on the limestone as they entered the glass-walled conservatory. Sunlight poured in from the ceiling panels. At the center, seated beside a table set with porcelain and silver, was Richard Thorne. He barely glanced as they entered. "Miss Vaughn," he said, voice clipped. "Sit." Willa lowered herself into the chair opposite him, spine straight. "I understand you've made quite the impression," he said, slicing into a croissant without looking up. "The agency Kellan recommended you to has reported a shift in their branding initiative. Your work, I presume?" "I presented a new strategy for their social campaign," Willa said. Richard finally looked at her. "And you believe that qualifies you to take my son's name?" Kellan's hand tensed on the back of Willa's chair. "I haven't asked for his name," Willa answered calmly. "Nor has he offered it. We're not here for your approval." Richard's gaze sharpened. "You've been in his life for what, a month? 2? You think that gives you any understanding of what this family requires?" "I don't make assumptions about families I've just met," she said. "But from what I've seen, what this family requires is control. What Kellan wants is a choice." Vivienne stepped forward, her tone syrupy. "Kellan has obligations. You may not understand what it means to carry a legacy, Miss Vaughn." "I understand what it means to choose who you become in spite of one," Willa said, never looking away from Richard. Kellan stepped closer, his voice low but clear. "I'm not marrying for leverage. If you can't accept that, then I'll walk away from the board." Richard leaned back, measuring him. "You would give up the company?" "I would give up your version of it," Kellan said. "But I'd rebuild something of my own. You know I have the resources." Willa looked up at him, realization dawning. You already started, she said. Kellan nodded. 6 months ago, new firm, private, no press. I wanted to build something without the Thorne name stamped across every blueprint. Richard's eyes narrowed. And what will you do with this little rebellion? Marry a girl who only knows you without your name? No, Kellan said. I'll marry a woman who saw me before the name mattered. Who challenged me when I didn't even realize I needed it. Willa's heart stopped. Vivienne's expression soured. You're making a mistake. Kellan turned to Willa, reaching for her hand. I've made 100 mistakes, he said, voice steady. But you're not one of them. Willa stared at him, her fingers tightening around his. You're serious. I've never been clearer. She hesitated. You're choosing to walk away from everything? I'm choosing to walk toward something better. Richard rose, brushing crumbs from his napkin. You'll regret this. No, Kellan said. I'll regret not doing it sooner. They left the conservatory without another word. Outside, the sky had shifted, clouds gathering in soft gray layers. The car waited at the base of the gravel drive, but Kellan didn't open the door. Instead, he turned to her, wind catching the edge of his coat. I didn't plan this, he said. But I knew from the moment you looked Brett in the eye and stood your ground that I'd never met anyone like you. Willa swallowed hard. You defended me before you knew my name, she said. You stood up for me with nothing to gain. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, curved box. No velvet, no theatrics, just sincerity. I stood up for you, he said, opening it. But somewhere along the way you stood up for me too, for the parts I buried. For the life I didn't think I could have. I don't want a legacy, I want a future. With you. She stared at the ring, simple, elegant, a single round diamond set in a band of brushed platinum. You're out of your mind, she whispered. Completely, he said. But I've never wanted anything more, she laughed, a soft, broken sound, and threw her arms around him. Yes, of course yes. Kellan held her tightly, burying his face in her hair as the first drops of rain began to fall, not the kind that ruined days, but the kind that rinsed the air clean. They didn't speak again until they were already in the car, hands still clasped between them. She traced her thumb along his knuckles. So, what now? Now, Kellan said, eyes locked on hers. We build something new, no rules, no conditions. Just us. He leaned in, kissed her forehead, and whispered, let's go home. And for the first time in her life, Willa knew exactly where that was. The antique doors of the chapel swung open to a hush. Willa stood at the threshold, her arm looped loosely through her brother's, her breath catching as the first notes of the string quartet traced through the vaulted space. The air inside was perfumed with white peonies and orange blossom, warm sunlight cutting through the stained glass high above and coloring the aisle in soft shades of rose and gold. But none of that compared to the man waiting at the altar. Kellan's eyes never left her. The suit was midnight blue, tailored precisely, but it was the expression on his face that undid her completely steady, open, and unguarded. Every inch of him said what his words hadn't needed to, I choose you. As she walked toward him, step by step, the world narrowed. Not because the room was full though it was, but because everything else faded into irrelevant blur when she reached him. Her brother pressed a kiss to her temple and stepped back. Kellan reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. You're real, he whispered. I'm here, she whispered back. The officiant began to speak, but Willa barely heard the words. Her focus was on the way Kellan's thumb traced the back of her hand like he was memorizing the shape of her all over again. Neither of them wrote traditional vows. I was never looking for you, Kellan began, his voice low but unwavering. In fact, I'd built a life on the assumption I could avoid something like this, and then you walked into it fierce, unshakable, impossible to ignore. You didn't want what I had. You only ever wanted the truth. And with you, I learned how to give it. Willa's heart thudded in her chest, but she didn't look away from him. You make me braver, she said, her voice clear. You make me want more, not because I'm lacking, but because you remind me I'm allowed to want. You didn't fix me. You stood beside me while I figured out how to fix myself. And somehow, loving you has felt like coming home to a place I didn't know I'd been missing. The moment was quiet, reverent. No performance, no expectations. Just honesty shaped into forever. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, Kellan didn't hesitate. He pulled her close, kissed her with a certainty that sent a ripple of warmth through every guest, and held her with a tenderness that left no doubt. She was his beginning, his middle, and every ending he would ever want. Later, beneath the soft glow of lanterns strung through the Thorne vineyard land, Kellan had purchased in her name as a wedding gift without ever mentioning it. Willa slipped off her heels and tucked her feet beneath her as they sat on the wide wooden deck, watching the last of the sun bleed into the hills. "You didn't tell me you bought this land," she said, sipping from a glass of sparkling elderflower. "I didn't buy it for me," he said. "I bought it because you said once your dream was to build something from the ground up. I figured this was a good place to start." She turned toward him. "A vineyard, a retreat," he said. "Design studio, gallery, maybe a lodge, whatever you want it to be." Her breath caught. "You really listened." "I always listen to you." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "What if I fail? Then we fail together." "But I don't think we will." They sat in silence for a while, the sounds of laughter and soft music drifting from below where their guests danced under the stars. "I don't need the Thorne name," she said quietly, "but I'm proud to carry it now." He kissed her temple. "You didn't take my name. You made it mean something." A few months later, the studio opened its doors. Not in the city, but on the edge of the vineyard, where light poured through massive windows and clients flew in from abroad for week-long creative residencies. Willa's vision came to life in soft textures, curated spaces, and stories told through design. She didn't need a title. She had a purpose. Kellan split his time between their home and his new firm, the one he'd built without his father's shadow. The board eventually tried to lure him back, but he declined with a single sentence. "I'm already where I belong." They never called again. On a rainy Thursday in late spring, Willa stood barefoot in the kitchen, her hands resting on the soft curve of her stomach. Kellan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Still thinking of names?" he asked. "They all sound wrong," she sighed. He kissed the side of her neck. "Then we wait until we meet her. You're sure it's a girl?" "I just know she's going to be as stubborn as her mother." She laughed, leaning into him. "God help you. I already have all the help I need." The rain tapped gently against the windows as they stood together, the world quiet around them. No chaos, no expectations. Just the life they'd chosen, piece by hard-won piece. And in every corner of it, love had taken root strong, wild, and entirely their own.